On the cold night of January 30th, 1933, thousands of people marched under the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. They carried torches, wore brown shirts, and filled the sky with nationalist chants to celebrate the appointment of a new German chancellor. The man they were cheering for was a jarring anomaly in German politics. Adolf Hitler was an Austrian-born former corporal with no higher education, no aristocratic pedigree, and a failed career as a painter. His only previous attempt to take the government by force was the 1923 beer hall putsch in Munich, a move that ended in a humiliating failure, police gunfire, and a prison sentence. Even worse, by late 1932, his political machine was breaking down. The Nazi Party was bleeding voters at the polls, running out of funds, and losing the momentum it had built over the previous years. And the one man who held the constitutional power to appoint the chancellor, President Paul von Hindenburg, actively despised him, refusing to hand over the government to someone he considered a radical upstart. If Hitler lacked a military, lacked a parliamentary majority, and was hated by the president, how did he convince a modern democracy to hand over absolute control? To understand the leverage Hitler used, we have to look at the immense national trauma hanging over the Weimar Republic. It started with the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, a post-war agreement carrying terms so punitive they broke the German economy before it could recover. Then came the first wave of financial destruction. By 1923, hyperinflation ran so wildly out of control that a lifetime of middle-class savings was reduced to worthless paper, forcing citizens to buy groceries with wheelbarrows full of cash. This chart tracks the second, more devastating blow, the Great Depression. Notice how German unemployment remains relatively flat through the late 1920s and then violently spikes, hitting an astronomical 6 million jobless citizens by 1932. Hitler seized on this mass misery. He aggressively pushed the myth that the German army had been stabbed in the back by politicians and began scapegoating Jews and communists. Look at this second line we're adding to the chart. The Nazi Party's vote percentage mirrors the exact upward trajectory of that unemployment spike. Entire demographics shifted their loyalties. Starving citizens and ruined professionals who would normally support moderate policies started looking for a savior. Widespread poverty provided the atmosphere Hitler needed, turning radical solutions into a viable path for a desperate public. The Nazi Party exploited this vulnerability, using a strict two-pronged strategy. First, Joseph Goebbels masterminded a modern propaganda machine. He chartered airplanes to fly Hitler to multiple cities in a single day, delivering highly emotional, logic-free speeches that built an intense cult of personality. The second weapon was brute force. Hitler's paramilitary wing, the SA, or Brown Shirts, deliberately provoked bloody street battles with opposing communist factions, turning local neighborhoods into active combat zones. This created a psychological trap for moderate voters. The Nazis manufactured the terror of a communist revolution in the streets, and then presented their own leader as the only strongman capable of restoring order. Even with that pressure, by late 1932, the government in Berlin was entirely deadlocked. Parliament couldn't form a majority, and the conservative elite were terrified of losing their wealth to a communist uprising. Enter Franz von Papen, a conservative aristocrat and former chancellor who believed he could use Hitler to solve the deadlock. Von Papen went to President Hindenburg with a specific proposition: appoint Hitler as chancellor, but box him in. They would restrict his cabinet to only 3 Nazi members, surrounding him with traditional conservatives who would dictate policy. The assumption was that Hitler's massive voter base could be harvested by the political establishment, while the man himself could be easily manipulated by the experienced politicians surrounding him. Von Papen was so confident in this backroom deal that he openly boasted to his peers that within 2 months they would push Hitler into a corner until he would squeak like a mouse. Hitler did not conquer the chancellery. He was appointed to it by an elite political establishment whose arrogance left them unable to recognize the nature of the extremist they were hiring. That arrogance proved fatal exactly 28 days after Hitler took office. On the night of February 27, 1933, the symbol of German democracy, the Reichstag Parliament building, went up in flames. Hitler immediately blamed the fire on a communist plot. He weaponized the resulting public panic to pressure an aging President Hindenburg into taking emergency action. The result was the Reichstag fire decree. With a single signature, the basic civil liberties of the German constitution, including free speech, a free press, and the right to a trial, were legally suspended. A few weeks later, on March 23rd, Hitler pushed for the final legislative blow, the Enabling Act. This law was written to allow the Chancellor to bypass Parliament and write his own laws without any oversight. Because the Reichstag was severely damaged, the vote took place here, at the Kroll Opera House. Opposition politicians had to walk through a gauntlet of armed SA troops, casting their votes in an environment of total intimidation. The act passed. Democracies rarely fall to outside invaders. They dissolve when a desperate public trades its liberty for a promise of order, and when a political establishment mistakenly believes